Tuesday, November 15th. Our readings today are Daniel 1 through 3, Psalm 88, and John 17. Now, to start off the book of Daniel, I want to point out a couple overarching themes to keep watch for in these readings. These stories show that God is sovereign, meaning above all with ultimate power. And we see that whenever he protects and blesses those who are faithful to him, who find themselves in difficult trials and dangerous situations. We also get to see that God's power triumphs over all kings and empires of the world. So, in chapter 1, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon takes over Jerusalem and brings some Israelite men into his service, including Daniel. And these men studied Babylonian language and literature, training for 3 years. And they were assigned portions of food and wine from the royal table, but in verses 8 and 9, we see that Daniel resolved not to defile himself with this food from the royal table, and God caused the official to show Daniel favor and compassion. And it turns out that after Daniel and his 3 friends were only served vegetables and water for 10 days at Daniel's request, they were actually healthier and better nourished than the rest of those who were eating the royal food. And this amazed everyone. Then, in verse 17, we're told God gave them knowledge and understanding of all kinds, including Daniel's ability to interpret visions and dreams. The king approved of these 4 men the most, and to no shock of believers, he found them 10 times better than all his magicians and enchanters. So, in chapter 2, we're told of the king's dream that kept him from sleep and deeply troubled him. He brought his astrologers and such, called Chaldeans, to interpret it, and decided that he would severely punish those who failed to help him and revealed any true lack of power. And he tested this by asking the so-called wise men to describe the dream before the king did. The men declared it impossible, saying that only a god could do something like that. So the king ordered the execution of all wise men, including Daniel and his friends. So those Israelites prayed for God's mercy and understanding, and God revealed the mysterious dream to Daniel in a vision, and Daniel praises God in response. Then he is brought to the king, imploring that the wise men not be executed, and he makes a point to say that the wisdom about the dream is from God and does not make Daniel himself superior. He then describes and interprets the dream as God revealed to him, and concludes saying in verse 45, "The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy." The king fell before him and said in verse 47, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries." Daniel was granted high power in the royal court over Babylon, and at his request his friends were made administrators. But, unfortunately, in chapter 3, we see that even after all that, the king doesn't really grasp the sovereignty of God. Nebuchadnezzar made a large image of gold and commanded that it be worshipped, or else those who refused to worship it would be thrown in a blazing furnace. Now, Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were now province administrators, refused to worship the image, enraging the king, and they say in verse 16, "We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." This, of course, made him even more angry, and the king makes the furnace 7 times hotter than usual, even killing some soldiers who brought these men to the furnace. And so, when they fall into the furnace, the king watches in amazement and says, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." And then he shouts, "Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out unharmed. They don't even smell like fire. So, once again, we see God's sovereignty, and Nebuchadnezzar says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. No other God can save in this way." And God's sovereignty and goodness is exactly what we have to remember and cling to in faithfulness when we read or experience the feelings that are described in passages like Psalm 88, where the writer calls out to God in desperation, depressed by all the suffering that has occurred, and wonders why God has supposedly hidden himself and rejected him. But God is always working for the good of his kingdom, and like Daniel and his friends, we should strive to remain faithful even though we know we will face hard times in this life. And speaking of those times of desperation and brokenness over suffering, John 17 is a great chapter to be put into this set of readings today. It's the part of the gospel before Jesus is arrested, when he is praying to the Father in the garden, knowing exactly what tragic fate he is about to come face to face with. In verses 1 through 4, Jesus says, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. For you granted him authority over all people, that he might give eternal life to all those you have given him. Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do." And I'll conclude with his words in verses 20 through 23. "I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message," the message of the disciples, "that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." Friends, believing in our God does not mean we are exempt from all kinds of suffering, but we are promised salvation in this Jesus, our Christ. And how wonderful it is to have the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries on our side, because he loves us. And so with that, until we see you again, you are sent.